Let's look at opinion polling and campaign. First of all, an opinion poll is just a survey of the American people. Could be on, if the election were today, who would you vote for? Could be, what is the most important issue that America is facing today? It's just it gives us some kind of idea of where the American people stand on something. So it's just an opinion poll, a survey. Now, when you look at opinion polling, there's a few things you should look at. First of all, always look at the date of the poll. This one is September 12th through 15th of 2014. Okay, that gives you some idea how recent the poll is. If you get a poll that's past a couple weeks, especially on campaign issues, I would disregard it. I think a poll is probably only going to be accurate within a week or two of it being conducted. Things change in elections. So always pay attention to the date. The other thing is this N, and this is the total number of people that have been polled. Now, if you're polling the United States and you're saying, well, there's 300 and some million people that live in the U.S., how can we make a poll with only 854 people responding? And I would say this is kind of low. That's why our margin of error is 4. Notice also the number here, and it doesn't have to be 10,000, but look at how many people were actually polled, but also pay attention to the margin of error. This is plus or minus 4%. The best you will ever see is 3, plus or minus of 3. And statistically, I think that's as close as you can get it. So as long as a poll is done scientifically and randomly, a margin of error of 3 is pretty darn good. And if we have a margin of error of 3, realize that means this poll is not 100% accurate. Let's say that we do a poll and we ask, if the election were today, who would you vote for? And the results are 52% say they'd vote for candidate A, 48 for candidate B. Well, if it's a plus or minus 4, we can move those numbers forward. So really, because it falls within that margin of error, it's too close to call. That poll can't give us any information other than the fact that it is a very close election. So pay attention to the margin of error on any poll. Now, there's different ways that polls are used. Here's a poll, and it's this one right here, conducted by CBS New York Times in September of 14. And the question was, which of the following is the most important issue in deciding who to vote for in Congress in November? And these are the results. 38% of the Americans polled said the economy, 17% terrorism, and so on. Now, if you're a candidate running for office, these types of polls can be helpful to you because it can give you some idea on what issues that you should focus on. If you're spending most of your time on the budget and your opponent is spending time on their campaign, giving speeches and running commercials on the economy, it seems like your opponent is talking about the issues that the people are concerned with and you're not. So these kind of polls give you some kind of idea of what issues maybe you should focus on in an election if you're running. Here's another one, same kind of idea. Now this is an older poll. This is 2011. Margin of error is 3. What's the most important problem facing the country today? Again, you'll notice economy and jobs is up there pretty high. And that is typically the case. Usually economy and jobs are usually one of the highest or most important issues for most Americans. That's why you see candidates talking about those issues more than you hear them talking about other things. So it gives the candidates some idea. The other thing is concerns of people may change. So again, like I had said earlier, just because a poll says that the economy is the number one issue today doesn't mean it will be in 2 or 3 weeks. Maybe something happens out there. Maybe we get attacked or there's a terrorist attack and all of a sudden terrorism becomes the biggest issue. So those things are not set in stone, but they're a snapshot of what people are feeling today. There is a number of different polling sites that look at things. And let's look at polling report Or let's look at pollster from 2012, because there's some things in here I find kind of interesting. This was during the last presidential election. And this gives us the results of how people voted. But the blue states are the ones that voted for President Obama. The red states voted for his challenger, Mitt Romney. And these states in here that were the toss-up states, we call them, those are the ones that were very close. And let's just pick a state here. Here's what's kind of cool about this site. Let's look at Florida. In Florida, it breaks it down. It says when the last poll was taken, right before the election, 48.2% of the people would vote for Obama, 48.2% would vote for Romney. Basically, it's too close to call. And they break it down over time. This is January of 2012, and then you see that President Obama had a little lead here, 48 to 42%. And then it got closer. The states that are close, they'll watch these polls, and if it's close, candidates have to spend time in these states. They have to run commercials because the state is too close. If we look at another state, let's look at another one of those close states. Let's look at Colorado. And you'll see by looking at Colorado, President Obama in the latest polls, right before the election, 48 to 46%. Too close to call on this. And then we can see the historical trend here. It was close. President Obama was leading in the polls for much of the election, but only within that margin of error. So it's really too close to call. If you're a candidate and a state is this close, you have to spend time in that state. Now let's look at another state. Let's look at South Dakota. Not a lot of polls done in South Dakota. Mitt Romney, 52%. Barack Obama, 42%. It's not very close. And if we look at the polls, Mitt Romney is leading the whole way through. Now, if you're President Obama, you probably are not going to spend a lot of time in South Dakota. Not a lot of time, not a lot of money. There's only 3 electoral votes, and there's a very good chance you're not going to win. And with our winner-take-all method, it doesn't make any difference if you barely lose the state. If you lose the state, you don't get the electoral votes. So, if it looks like there's states that you aren't going to win, why spend time in that state? Or if there looks like a state that you're going to win easily, why spend time in that? Let's look at California. California poll, Barack Obama is leading in the polls there. And if we look at the polls at any time, we see that President Obama has a big lead. Mitt Romney probably did not spend a lot of time in California, even though there's a lot of electoral votes there, because he realizes that he's probably not going to win that state. Barack Obama probably doesn't spend a lot of time and money in that state either, because he realizes he probably will win that state. You can't necessarily take states for granted, but polling gives you some idea on which states are the actual close states. And those are the states that you need to spend a lion's share of your time in there. So those states like, the Virginia, and the North Carolinas, and the Floridas, and the Ohio, and Colorado, and some of those states, those are the ones that become very, very important. And that's why you see that in a presidential election, candidates don't spend equal time in all the states. And they don't just go to the largest states with the most electoral votes. They go to the states that are the closest, that polling is showing that it could go either way. And that's an important tool that candidates use. They also sometimes use exit polling. And let's look at exit polling from 2012. Now, exit polling doesn't help them in a current election, but you can look at an exit polling from an election to try to give you some idea of what your party needs to do differently in the next election. In here, we see that the Republicans did well with the male vote, but on the female vote, the Democrats did better. Okay? On the married women, Republican did better, but non-married women overwhelmingly to President Obama. And we can break it down into gender. We notice, or not gender, but race. African Americans typically will vote Democrat. Now, sometimes people say, well, African Americans probably voted for Barack Obama because he's black. There may be some of that, but I think if we look at past elections, we see that African Americans vote for Democratic candidates more often. So truthfully, these candidates would have voted Democrat, though the African American voters most likely would have voted Democrat anyway, no matter if the candidate was white or black. The Hispanic vote, this is a concern for the Republican Party because this is the largest, the most quickly rising group of voters. And the Democrats overwhelmingly won the Hispanic vote in that election. So we can break this down into different categories here. So you see, exit polling gives you some idea of how different subgroups voted. And even though it doesn't help in a current election because it's already done, it gives a party some idea of what they need to do in the next election. You saw the Republican Party, after losing a presidency, really realize that maybe they need to do some things to try to attack the Hispanic voters. They lost by a huge margin, a bigger margin than they typically do with Hispanic voters. So these types of polling, when we're looking at polling, what I want you to do is look at how polling can be used for parties, for candidates. What can they do? So what issues should they focus on is an important thing. What states should a presidential candidate focus on? And all of those things, all that information can be used by candidates to try to help them win an election.